The camera finds the shoes first. A pair of scuffed white Converse, the rubber sole, peeling at the left toe, standing on a red carpet runner that cost more per yard than Zara Mensah's mother made in a morning shift. The camera pulls back slowly the way a documentary crew pulls back when they sense that what they're recording is going to matter later, not tomorrow, but for a long time. The Memorial Auditorium at Stanford University holds 600 people on a Saturday morning in late February. And every one of those 600 people has better shoes than the girl in row 6. She is 14 years old. She has a laptop that is 4 years older than her social studies textbook. She has a blazer from a Goodwill on Northside Drive in Atlanta that is 2 sizes too wide in the shoulders, which she safety pinned from the inside the night before her flight so it would hang straight. She has a name tag that reads, Zara Mensah Young Innovator, North Atlanta High School. The gold lettering catching the auditorium light the way gold catches all light indifferently without caring who is watching. She does not know yet that in 22 minutes, a man at the front of this room is going to build a wall in front of 600 people. She does not know that she has been carrying the door to that wall in her backpack for 3 years. But the camera already knows. The camera is already waiting. Freeze. Cut back 3 weeks. Atlanta, Georgia. The 3rd floor of a beige brick apartment building on the north end of Bankhead, where the elevator has been out of service since October, and the stairwell smells like the fried plantains from the unit below, and the pine cleaner from the unit across the hall, a combination so specific to this building that Zara can close her eyes anywhere in the country and reconstruct the whole hallway from that smell alone. The building has 41 units. There is one working washer in the basement laundry room. The parking lot floods when it rains. This is home. Zara has never once been embarrassed by it. Her mother, Nana Mensah, leaves for Grady Memorial Hospital at 6:45 in the evening, 5 nights a week, ICU floor, 12 hours a shift. She comes home at 7 in the morning. She showers. She sleeps until 2 in the afternoon if the night has been quiet, until noon if it hasn't. On the night Zara falls asleep before her mother leaves, she wakes up to a note on the refrigerator. On the mornings Nana comes home before Zara leaves for school, they have 11 minutes at the kitchen table that they have both learned to treat like currency, not to waste, not to rush to fold carefully and put somewhere they can find it later. The notes on the refrigerator say things like leftover rice on the second shelf. Don't forget your library book. I checked the weather and it's cold, so wear the gray sweater, not the hoodie. They say I heard you up at midnight again, baby. The math will still be there in the morning. They say sometimes just I love you. Full stop. Because some mornings that is the only sentence that fits. Zara is almost always awake at midnight. On the night that matters, the Tuesday 3 weeks before Stanford, the night the email comes, Zara is at her desk with the Chromebook open running a training loop on Google Colab because the Chromebook itself can't handle the compute. The screen shows a progress bar moving through Epic 17 of 30. There is a half-eaten bowl of cereal at the corner of the desk. There is a green hardcover notebook open to a page of equations, the handwriting neat and deliberate in a way that is nothing like Zara's own hurried scrawl. The notebook does not belong to her. The email arrives at 11:53 p.m. Subject line, Invitation Lighthouse, AI Summit, 2026/Young Innovators Program. Zara reads it once fast the way she reads everything fast. Then she reads it again slower the way she reads things that don't quite fit inside the shape of what she expected her life to look like. Top 12 students under 16 years old in North America. Stanford University. All expenses, travel, and accommodation. February 27th through March 1st. She sits with it for 4 minutes, the progress bar on Google Colab ticking through. Epic 18, Epic 19. The training loss dropping in small, careful increments like water finding the lowest point of a surface. Then she picks up the Chromebook, carries it into her mother's bedroom, and stands in the doorway. Nana is sitting on the edge of the bed in her scrubs, one shoe already on one shoe in her hand. She looks up. Something in her daughter's face makes her put the shoe down on the floor and reach out a hand. Zara crosses the room and holds the laptop out. Nana reads. The room is quiet enough that Zara can hear the refrigerator from the kitchen, a low electrical hum that has always been slightly too loud. A sound that belongs to this apartment, the way the smell of pine cleaner belongs to the hallway. Nana reads the email a second time. The silence stretches for nearly a minute, which in that bedroom is a very long time. Then she does something Zara will remember for the rest of her life. She reaches out her right hand and presses her palm flat against the laptop screen. Not to scroll, not to close it, just to press it flat, the way you press your hand against a window when you can't reach through. We'll find a way to send you, baby. Her voice is steady, more resolved than hope. I promise. What Zara does not know on that Tuesday night is the math her mother is already doing in her head. The flight from Atlanta to San Francisco costs $387 on the dates listed. The blazer Zara will need costs $34 at the Goodwill on Northside Drive. There is $60 in the household account for unexpected expenses. The gap between what exists and what is needed is not impossible, but it requires something, and that something is time, which is the one resource that cannot be borrowed. Nana will pick up 4 extra weekend shifts in the next 2 weeks. 64 hours of other people's blood pressure readings, morphine drips, ventilator adjustments, and the specific exhaustion of watching strangers at their most fragile. She will not tell Zara about the extra shifts. She will tell Zara only that the flight is booked, the blazer budget is sorted, and the building neighbor Mrs. Achebe has agreed to drive Zara to Hartsfield-Jackson on the morning of the 27th. Zara will find out about the extra shifts from Mrs. Achebe's daughter the week before the trip. She will not say anything to her mother. She will fold that knowledge somewhere deep and carry it to California, and she will still be carrying it when a man in a charcoal suit places a cup of coffee on her lap and tells her to hurry up. But that is 3 weeks away. Tonight, Zara closes the email, sets the Chromebook on her mother's dresser, and goes back to her desk to watch Epic 21 complete. The training loss has dropped another 4 points. The model is learning. Outside the window, Bankhead is mostly dark at this hour, the orange glow of the streetlights catching the bare upper branches of the oak tree in the parking lot, a tree so old it predates the building by at least 40 years. Zara has always liked that tree. She likes the idea that something was here before all of this and will be here after. She picks up the green notebook and turns to page 7. The handwriting on page 7 is the same neat, deliberate script as the rest of the notebook. The handwriting of a man who learned penmanship somewhere. It was taken seriously, who formed every letter as if it might be graded. The page is covered in equations, a partial architecture diagram with arrows and Greek letters. A system that looks to someone who doesn't know what they're looking at, like a network of boxes connected by careful intent. In the right margin of the page, written in letters smaller than everything around them, is a single word in Twi. Faye. Zara's mother told her what it meant 2 years ago, sitting at this same kitchen table at 2 in the morning after a 16-hour shift still in her scrubs. Your father used to call beautiful math that. Nana had smiled the smile she only smiles when she talks about him, small, private, aimed somewhere past the room. It means elegant. Kofi Mensah was 38 years old when he died. He had a gap between his front teeth that showed when he smiled wide, which was often, and he had the hands of someone who had done both delicate and heavy work. Long fingers pronounced knuckles, a small scar on the left thumb from a soldering iron when he was 19. He spoke 3 languages and could read 2 more. He drove for Uber in Atlanta for 11 years because the work that his mind was built for had never been able to support his family, and he drove for Uber because his family needed to be supported. And he never once, not once in 11 years, treated those 2 facts as a contradiction. He drove and he wrote and he drove. The notebooks accumulated in a cardboard box on the high shelf in the bedroom closet, and the Uber app accumulated 5-star ratings from passengers who called him courteous, professional, pleasant, great conversation, and he brought the money home and he paid the rent, and he loved his wife and he loved his daughter, and he wrote. Zara knows all of this from the notebooks from her mother's stories, from a small number of videos on an old phone Nana kept charged in the nightstand drawer. What she knows from herself, from her own memory, from the weight of the years before she was old enough to understand what she was losing, is less precise. She knows the specific way he said her name, which was not Zara, but Z. The second syllable almost swallowed. She knows the smell of the jacket he wore for driving. A dark green bomber with a broken zipper pull which Nana kept on the hook behind the bedroom door for a year after he died before finally putting it in the box. She knows the story he used to tell her at bedtime when she was 4 and 5 and 6, the one about Anansi the spider who tried to keep all the world's wisdom in a gourd hung from the highest tree until the gods, tired of watching him climb and guard and climb and guard, shook the tree and the gourd fell. And the wisdom spilled across the earth into every person and every creature and every overlooked corner. He had told her that story with a different emphasis every time, sometimes as a warning, sometimes as a comfort, sometimes as something that seemed even to a 5-year-old like a message he was sending to himself. She had been 11 years old when Nana set the cardboard box on the kitchen table. "This was your father's. I never opened it." Her mother's voice had been very careful, very level, the voice she used for things that required steadiness. "When you are ready." Zara had taken the box to her room. She had put it under her bed. For 9 months she did not open it, not because she forgot, not because she didn't think about it, but because she understood in the way that children understand things they have not been taught, that opening the box meant beginning something, and beginning something meant that the version of her father she had built from memories and stories and the smell of a jacket would have to make room for something more specific. She was not sure she was ready for specific. She opened it on a Friday night in April, alone in the apartment, sitting on the kitchen floor with a glass of orange juice. She took the contents out one by one. The 3 notebooks came first, hardcover, the pages warped slightly at the edges from years in storage. She opened the first one and found what she had not expected to find: equations she recognized. Not understood, not yet, but recognized the way you recognize a face in a crowd before you can place the name. Numbers and variables arranged in patterns that had grammar, that had argument, that were clearly going somewhere. The language in the right column was English. The language in the left column was something she didn't know, then something with a different rhythm to its shapes on the page. She found out later it was Twi. The hard drive was still in its original sleeve, a Western Digital 500 gigabyte, the packaging yellowed at the edges, but intact. She set it aside carefully, the way you set aside something you know you'll need eventually, but aren't equipped for yet. The folder of printouts came next. 4 papers. The RXI preprint headers visible across the top of each one, dated 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012. Author K. Mensa. She sat with the 2010 paper for a long time. The title read, "A Hybrid Neurosymbolic Architecture for Compositional Reasoning." She understood about a third of it. She understood enough to see that her father had been describing a system, a specific, detailed, technically argued system for solving a problem that, as best she could tell from the introduction, the entire field had been trying to solve for years. The rejection letter was at the bottom of the folder. Journal of Machine Learning Research, November 2011. The letterhead was clean and institutional. The language was precise. After careful review, the committee has determined. She read it 3 times. She read it the way you read something that doesn't add up, not because the words are unclear, but because the arithmetic is wrong, because the answer the letter arrives at doesn't match the problem she can see on the pages above it. The photograph was at the very bottom of the box, black and white, slightly overexposed. A young man, 32 years old, standing in front of a stone building that the label on the back identified as the University of Ghana at Legon. He was wearing a graduation gown and holding a diploma against his chest. He was smiling so wide you could see the gap between his front teeth. Zara sat on the kitchen floor with that photograph in her hands for a long time. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, someone on the street below was playing music from a car, something with a deep bass that she felt more than heard. She sat until the music faded and the street went quiet, and the clock above the stove read 2:37 in the morning. She did not sleep that night. 3 months later, she told her mother what she had found in the notebooks. They were at the kitchen table on a Sunday afternoon, the only day of the week when they were reliably in the same room at the same hour. Zara had the 2010 paper open in front of her, the margins filled with her own annotations in pencil. Nana sat across from her and listened in the way she listens to complicated things, very still, very present, not interrupting. When Zara finished, Nana was quiet for a moment. Then she told the story of November 2011. He had stayed up until 4 in the morning finishing the paper, the 2011 submission, the one that would go to JMLR with a cover letter he had revised 7 times. He had driven for Uber at 6 a.m. because the rent was due. That afternoon, he had picked up a man in a charcoal suit from Hartsfield-Jackson, a man carrying a leather briefcase and a confidence that occupied the back seat before he did. Somewhere near the Spaghetti Junction interchange, in the particular dense traffic of a weekday afternoon, Kofi had taken a wrong turn. The man had said it twice: uneducated immigrant. The exact same phrase, the same flat delivery, as if repetition would clarify the verdict. Kofi had not argued. He had found the correct route, delivered the man to his hotel on Peachtree, and driven home. He had come in the front door, taken off his jacket, sat down at the kitchen table, the same table where Zara was sitting now, and looked at his hands for a long moment. Then, "They don't know what I know, but Zara will." Nana told this story in the same careful level voice she used for things that required steadiness. When she finished, she folded her hands on the table. He used to tell you the Anansi story, she said. Do you remember it? Zara said she did. He said wisdom belongs to the village, not to one person. He said even Anansi tried to keep it all to himself once, and the gods made him drop it. She reached across the table and put her hand over Zara's. Some of it spilled into the world. Some of it spilled into us. Then Nana went to bed because she had a shift at 6 a.m. Zara stayed at the table until the sun came through the kitchen window. What happened after that was not dramatic. It was methodical. Zara was 12 years old. She had a library card at the Adamsville branch and access to the internet through the school's Wi-Fi network and through the public library's computers when school was closed. She watched every lecture she could find, Andrei Karpathy for the code architecture, Andrew Ng for the foundational theory, a set of MIT OpenCourseWare videos on symbolic systems that she rewatched 4 times until the concepts sat correctly in her head. She checked out every machine learning textbook the Adamsville branch held, which was not many, and worked through them in the order the librarian suggested. She taught herself Python on the Chromebook. When the Chromebook couldn't handle what she was trying to do, she found Google Colab, which gave her GPU time she couldn't otherwise afford, and she learned that if you refresh the runtime at the right moment, you could extend your free session. And she learned that the queue moved faster at night, and she started working at midnight because midnight was when the queue was shortest. By the time she was 13, she had rebuilt her father's hybrid architecture from the sketches in his notebooks. The architecture combined 2 approaches the field had mostly treated as separate neural networks, which learned patterns from large amounts of data, and symbolic reasoning systems, which processed information according to explicit logical rules. Her father's 2010 paper had argued that the combination, if configured correctly, if the symbolic layer was allowed to generate an intermediate representation that the neural layer could then operate on, would allow the system to handle compositional reasoning at a depth that neither approach could reach alone. Every major paper published after 2015 said this couldn't work. The Aldridge limit was the name the field had given to the ceiling, the point somewhere around the 7th step of any compositional reasoning chain, where all current architectures fell off a cliff of accuracy. The limit was described not as a software problem, but as a structural one, geometric, embedded in the way neural networks process language. Scaling didn't help. More data didn't help. The cliff was the cliff. Zara's model passed it, not by a small amount. At 83% accuracy on n-step compositional reasoning problems, her implementation exceeded the published benchmarks from every top-tier lab by a margin that shouldn't have been possible. She ran the test 3 times on different data sets, checking for contamination, checking for overfitting, checking for the kind of error that produces a beautiful number that falls apart the moment you look at it sideways. The number held. She had her mother's gift for not performing more emotion than a moment warrants. She looked at the results for a long time. She thought about page 7 of the second notebook. She thought about a word written in the margin in careful small script, and what it meant, and who had written it, and when. Then she uploaded the code to GitHub. She named the repository for Daddy 2010. She set it to public. She did not tell anyone. Not her mother, not her one close friend at school, not the librarian at Adamsville who had helped her find the textbooks. The repository existed the way a seed exists before anyone has thought to plant it, available, containing everything it needed, waiting for the right conditions. She entered the Georgia State Science Fair 3 weeks later. The category was artificial intelligence. The judges were 3 adults, a high school teacher, a county science coordinator, and a retired engineer from a telecommunications company, and they asked her questions with the careful uncertainty of people who understood that they were out of their depth but were trying hard not to show it. She answered what she could. The 3 questions she couldn't fully answer were the ones that went to the core of the theoretical argument, the ones where the full answer was in her father's notebooks and not yet fully hers to give. The judges wrote her name down anyway. She won first place. 2 weeks after the science fair, the Lighthouse email arrived. In the days between winning first place and receiving the email, Zara had been thinking about the gap between what she had built and what she was able to fully claim. The benchmarks were hers. The code was hers. The 3 years of midnight work were hers. But the architecture, the original insight, the specific configuration of symbolic and neural layers, that made the whole thing function. The diagram on page 7 of her father's notebook. The word Faye in the margin that belonged to Kofi Mensah, who had published it in 2010, who had tried to submit it to 7 different venues before the submission history went quiet, who had driven strangers to their hotels and paid rent, and loved his family, and never stopped believing that the thing he had found was real. She thought about this a lot. She thought about how you carry something that is half yours and half someone else's into a room full of people who may not believe either half. She didn't have an answer. She had a plane ticket, a Goodwill blazer, and a repository named after her father. The morning of February 27th was a Thursday. Nana had worked the overnight shift and come home at 7 a.m. as usual. She was asleep when Zara's alarm went off at 6. The note on the refrigerator said, "Safe travels. Baby, call me when you land. The gray cardigan is clean and in your top drawer." Zara did not take the gray cardigan. She took the blazer, which she had pressed with the iron the night before, as carefully as she knew how to press something. She stood in the kitchen for a moment before leaving, looking at the refrigerator with its note at the small frame photograph of her parents on the counter, taken somewhere Zara didn't recognize. A backyard summer light, Kofi with his arm around Nana's shoulders. Both of them caught mid-laugh in a way that meant whoever was holding the camera had said something, and the something had landed. She had looked at this photograph so many times it had lost its power to surprise her. It just looked like her parents. It looked like what she was carrying. She picked up the duffel bag and the backpack and went down 3 flights of stairs to where Mrs. Achebe's daughter Adwoa was waiting in a blue sedan, the engine already running against the February cold. Inside the backpack, packed between 2 folded t-shirts, the Chromebook, the Western Digital hard drive in its original sleeve, and the green notebook she had started on the night she opened the cardboard box, the first page written in 11-year-old handwriting, April 4th, 2022. And below that, in careful letters, for Daddy. She had carried that notebook every day since she started it. She was about to carry it into a room with 600 strangers and one professor who had spent 35 years standing in front of a door her father had drawn first. She didn't know that yet. Adwoa drove south on I-285 toward Hartsfield-Jackson, the Atlanta skyline catching the early light on the left, the radio playing something instrumental and low. They didn't talk much. Adwoa asked if she was nervous, and Zara said she thought she was more ready than nervous, which was true in the way that most true things are partially provisionally subject to revision. The Delta terminal at Hartsfield was already moving at 7:30 a.m., the particular urgent shuffle of people who have flights to catch and coffee to acquire, and no interest in anyone who is moving slower than they are. Zara checked in at the kiosk. She went through security. She sat at the gate in a blue plastic chair and opened the green notebook to a blank page near the back and wrote out for the 4th time that month the core theoretical argument from her father's 2010 paper. In her own words, the way she had reconstructed it from the notebooks and from 3 years of working through the math. She did this not because she had forgotten it, but because writing it out was how she made sure it still held the way a climber checks the rope before ascending, even if they checked it the night before. The argument held. The flight was 4.5 hours. She slept for 2 of them, her head against the window, the green notebook open on the tray table. When she woke, the landscape below had changed from the wide, flat expanse of the south to something drier, more spare, the mountains visible to the east and the brown hills of the Bay Area already visible ahead. She had never been west of Birmingham. The scale of the country seen this way had always seemed theoretical to her, something she knew intellectually but hadn't felt as a physical fact. She felt it now. San Francisco was cold in a way Atlanta's February was not. Not wet cold, not the bone cold of a city built between 2 rivers, but dry and bright and merciless, the kind of cold that felt cleaner than it had any right to feel. She walked out of the terminal into the rideshare pickup area and saw in the press of waiting drivers and cardboard signs a woman holding a small whiteboard with her name on it. Simone Rivera was 28, brown skin, her hair in a thick braid that fell over one shoulder, a laminated Lighthouse Summit badge clipped to the belt of her jacket. She was smiling before Zara reached her. "Hermanita," she said, and her voice had the particular warmth of someone who understood that this moment, this very moment, the arriving moment was not a small thing for the person arriving. "You ready for this?" Zara considered the question honestly. "I think so. You don't have to be ready." Simone took the duffel bag from her shoulder without asking. "You just have to be there." In the car on the way to the hotel, Simone told her that of the 12 young innovators selected for the program, 2 were black. Zara was one. An 11-year-old roboticist from Toronto was the other. Simone had volunteered to be the personal contact for both of them. She said this simply without ceremony, the way you state a logistical fact that also happens to communicate something important. Zara heard both the logistic and the important thing. They checked into the hotel at midnight. The lobby was the kind of lobby that knows it's a lobby: high ceilings, polished surfaces, the smell of fresh flowers and arrangements too large to be anything but intentional. Zara's room had a view of the parking structure, which she found more comforting than a view of the bay would have been. She was used to parking structures. She set the backpack on the desk. She took out the green notebook. She opened it to the page with the theoretical argument, read it through, once closed it. She plugged in the Chromebook to charge overnight. She set an alarm for 5:30 a.m. She lay down on the bed in her clothes and stared at the ceiling for 30 minutes, not thinking about anything in particular, just feeling the fact of being here in California in a hotel. 3 weeks after an email arrived in the middle of Epic 21, before she finally let herself fall asleep. Stanford, when she saw it in the early morning light, was nothing like anything she had pictured. She had pictured something imposing, deliberately institutional, the architectural grammar of importance. What she found was different buildings, the color of beach sand, low arches, open courtyards, and trees unlike any tree she had seen before. Tall eucalyptus, the bark peeling away in long curling strips to reveal pale greenish wood beneath the branches, catching the February light in a way that seemed almost accidental, as if the trees hadn't been planning to be beautiful. "They're not native," Simone said, following her gaze. "Eucalyptus, brought over from Australia in the 1850s. Half the state has them now. They're considered invasive, technically." Zara looked at a tree that had been brought from somewhere else and planted in soil that wasn't originally its own, and had grown so tall and so thoroughly that it was now simply part of the landscape, for better or worse, inextricably. She did not say anything about this. The Memorial Auditorium's lobby was large enough to contain her entire apartment building twice over. The red carpet runner ran from the front entrance to the registration table, flanked on both sides by sponsor banners, technology companies, foundations, a research institute, a university press. Zara read the banners carefully as they walked in. She recognized most of the names. The security guard stopped her at the entrance to the main auditorium. He was an older white man in a Navy uniform, and he looked at her with the particular expression of someone performing a professional duty they believe in this instance is warranted. His gaze moved from her face to the duffel bag, to the backpack, to her face again. His smile was the smile adults use on children who appear to be in the wrong place. Patient, slightly condescending, fundamentally certain. "Sweetheart, the student tour is in the building next door. This one is for the conference." Zara held up her badge. He took it from her hand. He turned it over. He looked at the lanyard. He looked at her again. He stepped back 3 feet and raised his walkie-talkie. While he waited for confirmation, 2 adults walked past Zara into the auditorium, a man with a leather portfolio and a woman with a rolling suitcase. Neither wore a badge. The guard did not look at them. Simone's right hand at her side had closed into a fist. She did not move forward. She did not speak. Her jaw was set in the specific way of someone who has learned that intervening in this moment makes it worse. After 90 seconds, the guard came back. He handed the badge to Zara. He did not apologize. He did not adjust his expression. "Go ahead." The check-in desk was attended by a young woman with a clipboard and the bright, attentive smile of someone who enjoys their job. She looked up at Zara. Her smile recalibrated slightly. "Hi, sweetie. Are you a volunteer? The volunteer shirts are in the room." Simone stepped forward. "She's a young innovator. Same as everyone else here." Her voice was not raised. It was simply placed with precision exactly where it needed to be. The woman blinked twice, looked at the clipboard, found the name, handed over the program. She did not apologize either. Zara's assigned seat was row 6, seat 14, center aisle. She walked to it carrying both bags, found it, sat down. The seat to her right was empty. So was the seat beyond that. A couple in matching wool coats was already settled in seats 15 and 16. The husband glanced at Zara as she sat, leaned left, said something to his wife in a voice too low to carry. His wife looked once, looked away. They gathered their programs, their coats, their things, and moved in an unhurried but deliberate way to row 9. They did not look back. Zara sat in the center of 3 empty seats. Simone slipped into seat 13 on Zara's left. "You okay, Hermanita?" I'm fine, Zara said. She was not fine. She was aware with a precision that had become efficient over years of practice of exactly what had just happened and exactly what it meant and exactly how much of her mental and emotional energy she was willing to allocate to it. The answer was a measured amount, a calibrated amount. Not zero, she was 14, not a machine, but not so much that it consumed what she needed for the next 3 hours. A man in a charcoal suit came down the row carrying a paper cup of coffee. He stopped at her row. He looked at the empty seats. He looked at Zara. His gaze moved to the badge and moved past it or through it in the way gazes sometimes move through things they have decided not to see. He held out the cup. Cappuccino, no sugar, almond milk. Hurry it up, kid. Zara looked at the cup. Then she looked at her name tag. The gold letters, Young Innovator. The weight of what they represented the 64 hours her mother had traded in exchange for this seat in this row. She looked back at the man. I don't work here, sir. The man's face did something complicated, reddening, recalibrating the expression of someone who has made an assumption that has just been returned to them. He took the cup back. He walked 4 steps to the trash can and dropped it in without taking another sip. He did not apologize. He did not look back. From the row behind her, 2 voices not lowered. Lighthouse is really slipping. They've got high schoolers in the program now. Diversity sponsor money. They have to look inclusive. Marketing, all of it. Real talent gets pushed out. Zara heard every word. She did not turn around. She reached into the backpack and took out the green notebook. She held it with both hands, her thumbs running along the edge of the pages, the way some people run their thumb along a rosary, not praying exactly, but needing something solid to press against. She did the arithmetic in her head because she couldn't help doing it, because the arithmetic was always there. $387 was 2 night shifts at Grady ICU, and her mother had worked 4 extra weekend shifts, which was 64 hours, which was blood pressure checks and ventilator alarms, and the particular weight of knowing whether someone was going to make it through to morning. 64 hours of that. So Zara could sit here. The thought that came next was quiet, but it arrived with weight. Maybe I shouldn't have come. She recognized the thought. She had met it before in the hallway outside Mrs. Drake's classroom in 7th grade when Mrs. Drake had pulled her aside after a parent-teacher conference and said in a voice so kind it almost concealed its content, "Zara, you have such a gift for storytelling. Have you thought about focusing more on English STEM is so demanding, especially for girls like you?" Zara had been 12. She had nodded. She had said thank you. She had gone home and quietly scored 100% on every mathematics test for the rest of the year. Not out of anger exactly, but out of a need to establish for her own accounting what was actually true. Mrs. Drake had never mentioned STEM again, and Zara had understood then that silence can be a form of concession and also a form of disappearance. She was not interested in disappearing. She closed her eyes for 2 seconds. She put her hand inside the backpack and felt for the cover of her own first notebook, the one she had started the night she opened the cardboard box, the one with 11-year-old handwriting on the first page. She didn't take it out. She just felt the corner of it, the cardboard slightly soft from 3 years of being carried. She breathed out. She was already here. The plane ticket had already been bought. The blazer had already been pinned from the inside and pressed with the iron. 64 hours of her mother's work had already been spent. She opened the green notebook to page 7. The equations were the same as they always were. The diagram was the same. The word "fey" in the margin was the same. She read it the way you read something you know by heart, but need to confirm is still true, the way a navigator checks coordinates, not because they doubt the destination, but because the check itself is part of arriving. The auditorium lights began to dim. The announcer's voice came through the speakers with the practiced resonance of someone who knows that an introduction is itself an argument for why what follows matters. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome to the stage holder of the Norton Chair of Computer Science at Stanford University, Dr. Edmund Hargrove. The applause started immediately. It was the kind of applause a room produces when it is applauding something it has already decided on. Not a performance, not an evaluation, but a confirmation of something long established. The room was confirming Hargrove before he had said a word. Zara watched him come from stage left, tall, trim gray hair cropped close, a charcoal blazer over a black turtleneck, small, round wireframe glasses. He moved to the lectern the way people move when they have done this so many times that the stage is not a stage anymore, but simply the room they happen to be standing in. The first slide came up behind him. The Wall 35 Years of Evidence. In smaller type from the upcoming book by Edmund Hargrove, Norton Press. March 11th, 2026, 11 days from today. Zara set the green notebook on her lap. She reached into the backpack and took out the Chromebook without opening it, placed it on the seat beside her. She watched Hargrove clip the microphone to his lapel. She watched him survey the 600 faces in front of him with the particular satisfaction of a man who knows what he's about to say and has known for a long time. He hadn't seen her yet. She settled back in her chair, the notebook under her hands, the Chromebook beside her, the blazer 2 sizes too wide in the shoulders, the dollar store glasses slightly crooked on her nose, and she waited for him to begin building the wall. He would need 22 minutes to build it. She needed 12 to see where the door was. Hargrove spoke the way certain men speak when they have confused being believed with being right smoothly, with the cadence of someone who has given this exact talk in 17 cities and watched the same nodding heads in each of them, the same front row pens moving in the same careful shorthand. The first slide showed a steep blue line dropping off a cliff at the 7th step of a compositional reasoning chain. The second slide showed the same shape in a different color. The third was the same shape again from a different lab, a different year, a different research team that had arrived at the same wall from a different direction. 6 benchmarks, 6 cliffs, 6 years of data from the best-funded research institutions in the world, all of them pointing at the same ceiling with the same conclusion. The Aldridge limit, Hargrove explained, was not a funding problem. It was not a data problem. It was not a problem that more compute would solve or that a smarter team would eventually route around. It lived inside the geometry of how neural networks process sequential language, not in the weights, not in the training data, but in the fundamental architecture of the thing itself. He had spent 35 years establishing this. He had the citations. He had the replications. He had the MIT paper from 2014 that confirmed his 1999 findings, the DeepMind paper from 2022 that extended them. He cited these with the ease of a man citing his own address. What he did not cite was anything published outside a top-tier peer-reviewed venue. What he did not cite was any work from before 2014 that had not made it through the gate of institutional approval. What he did not cite was a paper titled A Hybrid Neurosymbolic Architecture for Compositional Reasoning, submitted to JMLR in October 2011 by a man named K. Mensa. Zara caught this absence at the 12-minute mark. She had been watching the slides with the specific attention of someone who knows the material from the inside rather than from the literature, who has not just read the argument, but rebuilt it from its components, tested it, found it wanting in a particular way that the person making it had not accounted for. The absence she noticed was not an oversight. It was structural. Every single benchmark Hargrove had presented, all 6, across all 3 decades, used raw natural language as its input. Text fed directly into a model. No intermediate step. No translation layer. No symbolic representation between the language the human wrote and the pattern matching the machine performed. The Aldridge limit appeared in every one of them because every one of them was testing the same architecture in the same configuration, and concluding from those tests that the limit belonged to intelligence itself rather than to the specific setup they kept using. It was, Zara thought, like measuring how fast you can walk in a swimming pool and concluding that human locomotion had a fundamental speed ceiling. She did not write this down. She had understood it clearly enough since the second time she'd run her father's benchmarks sitting at her desk at 1 in the morning while Epic 23 ticked through on the Colab screen. She let it sit in her chest with the particular weight of something that is true but not yet useful. Not yet, not for 12 more minutes. Not until the man at the lectern finished building the wall that she could already see the door in. Hargrove reached his final slide at the 22-minute mark. White letters on a black background. The question is no longer whether we can cross this wall. The question is whether we should stop trying. The silence lasted half a second, the silence of a room absorbing something before the applause replaced it. Most of the auditorium rose. The front rows were already on their feet before the people in the middle had fully decided to stand, the social physics of a room that has collectively decided this is a standing moment. The sound was long. It was warm. It was the sound of 600 people confirming something they had already believed before they arrived. A belief now elegantly reinforced by the man they'd paid to reinforce it. Zara did not stand. She sat in seat 14, the notebook closed on her lap, the Chromebook still unopened beside her. She was very still in the way that people are sometimes still when they are in fact doing the most intense work of their day. 3 rows behind her, the 2 professors who had discussed diversity money were applauding. The man in the charcoal suit who had handed her a coffee cup was applauding. The couple who had moved to row 9 were applauding. The guard who had taken her badge for 90 seconds was somewhere in the building, presumably going about his morning. Hargrove took a sip of water. He smiled the smile of a man who has just delivered something he's proud of. Any questions before we move to the panel discussion? The hands went up immediately. A distinguished professor in the second row, silver-haired European-cut jacket. A research director from a major lab in the third row, someone whose name Zara recognized from 4 different citations in the past year. A professor in the first row who had published a well-regarded textbook on deep learning that Zara had checked out from the Adamsville branch and read in a week. Hargrove scanned the front. He was already gesturing toward the second row, the comfortable gravitational pull of the front of the room. The known quantities, the faces that matched his expectation of who should be asking questions in this space. His hand moved in that direction. His eyes moved with it. Then his peripheral vision caught something. The way peripheral vision sometimes catches the thing. It was not looking for a small hand in row 6 raised straight up, not waving, not tentative, just vertical, steady as a cell tower on a flat horizon. His gesture slowed. His head turned. He found her a girl in a blazer that was slightly too wide in the shoulders, a name tag catching the auditorium light. Glasses slightly crooked on her nose. The smile on his face did not disappear. It underwent a transformation that was subtle enough that most of the 600 people in the room probably didn't notice it. It got smaller. It got more careful. It became the patient smile of a man deciding to be charitable with someone who is about to waste his time. Yes, the young lady in row 6. A pause, fractional, deliberate. Do you have a question, sweetheart? Are you lost? The laughter was not loud. It was the polite, mildly uneasy laughter of a room that has heard this kind of joke before and finds it slightly embarrassing, but still within the range of acceptable, the laughter of people who have decided not to decide yet. Zara stood up. Her knees were not steady. She registered this the way you register a physical fact, not with shame, not with panic, just as information about the current state of the system. Her hand on the clip-on microphone was not steady either. But the microphone did not care about steady. The microphone caught the sound that came through it and sent it to the speakers at the front of the room, and the speakers sent it to the live stream feed. And the live stream feed sent it to 71,000 people watching on their phones and laptops in break rooms, coffee shops, university offices, kitchens, cars parked in driveways with the engine running. Sir, your benchmarks are biased toward a single representation. She kept her voice level. The wall might not belong to AI. It might belong to the benchmarks. The laughter stopped. It stopped the way a ringing bell stops when you lay your hand flat against the metal completely. Suddenly, the silence after it more notable than the sound had been. For 3 full seconds, no one in Memorial Auditorium made a sound. Not the professor in the second row, not the research director in the third, not the 2 people behind Zara who had discussed diversity money. The live stream counter in the corner of a monitor in the production booth at the back of the room jumped from 71,000 to 74,000 in the time it took the silence to establish itself. Hargrove turned toward her fully. The cameras in the room turned with him, not because someone directed them to, but because cameras like eyes follow the thing that is not where they expected it to be. A 9th grader has just informed me that 35 years of my research is, in her opinion, biased. I'm saying there is a class of hybrid architectures your presentation didn't mention. The politeness in her voice was genuine, not strategic. She was not performing deference. She simply did not see the point in being rude when the argument itself was sufficient. The condescension in his voice was equally genuine. Where did you encounter this class of hybrid architectures? Sweetheart, TikTok. The laughter came back, but it was different this time. Thinner, less committed, the laughter of a room that is no longer entirely sure it wants to be laughing. A reporter in the press row stopped typing. Not to look up, but because the story in front of her had just changed, and she needed to decide how. At the panel table set up behind the lectern, 5 people sat facing the audience. 3 university researchers, a lab director, a technical editor. 4 of them had made no visible movement in the last 45 minutes. The 5th, a woman in her early 50s in a dark blazer, her natural hair cut close. Her posture, the contained posture of someone who has been waiting for a specific moment to deploy a specific thing. She leaned forward. Her name tag read, Doctor. Miriam Okafor, Carnegie Mellon University. Reginald, two syllables, no inflection, the economy of someone who has sat through many of these moments. Let the young woman finish. Hargrove's expression shifted not much, not in a way most of the room would catch, but enough. The presence of a peer invoking procedural fairness was a different situation than a ninth grader in a too-wide blazer. He recovered quickly the way practiced speakers recover, converting the hesitation into magnanimity in the space of a breath. His arms spread in the gesture of a man demonstrating his own generosity. Of course, I would never want to silence a young scholar. He turned back to Zara. In fact, why don't you come down and present your perspective? I'll give you 5 minutes. The room understood what had just happened before Zara fully processed it. The offer was structured as a gift platform time, the implied respect of being invited to the front. What it was in practice was a trap, the kind of trap that works because it looks nothing like one. 5 minutes was not enough time to present a technical counterargument. 5 minutes was enough time for a 14-year-old to stand at a lectern in front of 600 people, say something incomplete, and sit back down while the room concluded with a generosity it would congratulate itself on that she had tried. Zara looked at Simone. Simone looked back. She held the look for a long beat, long enough to communicate that she understood exactly what was being offered, that she had been in rooms like this before in different configurations, that she was not going to tell Zara what to do. Then very quietly, her voice low enough that it barely cleared the ambient sound of the room. Yo te respaldo, hermanita. I've got your back. Zara turned back to the stage. Hargrove was waiting with the patience of a man who expects confirmation of what he already knows. I'll need my laptop. A pause. And 20 minutes. The laughter Hargrove produced was genuine, the unguarded laugh of a man who has just received the best news of his morning, the confirmation that the situation is, after all, exactly what he thought it was. 20 minutes. I've spent 35 years on this question. By all means, take your time. At the panel table, Miriam Okafor did not laugh. She sat very still for 2 seconds, long enough to complete whatever calculation she was running, then placed both palms flat on the table in front of her, a small private gesture of preparation. The room exhaled collectively the way rooms exhale when a tension has been resolved into something that feels like resolution but isn't. Reporters started typing. Camera operators zoomed. In the production booth, a director pointed at one of his monitors and said something no one at home could hear, because what was happening on monitor 3 had just become more interesting than anything else in the building. The live stream counter climbed from 74,000 to 81,000 in the time it took Zara to close the Chromebook, slide it into the backpack zip, the backpack, settle it over one shoulder, take the green notebook in her other hand, step into the aisle and begin walking. On the platform X, a 14-second clip had already detached itself from the live stream and begun moving through the network. Stanford professor calls 14-year-old black girl sweetheart, asks if she learned AI from TikTok. It had 1,200 reposts when Zara reached row 5. By the time she reached row 3, it had passed 5,000. The carpet under her Converse made no sound. The only sound the cameras were picking up in Memorial Auditorium was the soft mechanical turning of their own lenses, tracking her down the aisle. 600 faces turned to follow. The faces were not all the same. Some were curious in the way that curiosity is just barely distinguishable from appetite. Some were embarrassed for themselves, for the room, for Hargrove, for the setup they had just watched. A few, a small number, but Zara noticed them the way you notice the things that don't quite match the pattern, wore something closer to attention. The particular attention of people who have not yet decided what they're watching. Each step in the carpeted silence accumulated weight. The security guard's voice, sweetheart, the student tour is next door. The check-in woman's voice, hi, sweetie, are you a volunteer? The couple's coats disappearing toward row 9, the charcoal suit in the coffee cup. The two professors in their confidence about what lighthouse was slipping on. Ms. Carolyn Drake in 7th grade, her voice so kind, STEM is so demanding, especially for girls like you. Zara had scored 100% on every math test for the rest of that year. Drake had never mentioned it. The silence had been a form of answer, and Zara had accepted it as such, because what else do you do with a silence that has already been given? You carry it. You put it somewhere that doesn't slow you down. You keep walking. Row 2, row 1. From somewhere below the level of any of those voices from a recording she had watched 100 times on a phone with a cracked screen. Her father's voice arrived, not loud, not dramatic. Just present the way certain memories are present. Kofi Mensah sitting at the kitchen table in 2011, a 5-year-old Zara doing homework across from him, the camera on the counter catching the angle of his face in ordinary light. Z, every problem has a door. You just have to step back far enough to see where it is. She stepped back. She kept walking. In the language his mother had taught him, and he had written in the margins of his notebooks, the word was Sankofa, return and retrieve what was left behind. Not as nostalgia, not as grief, as necessity. She reached the bottom of the aisle. The stage steps were to her left. The technician who handled the audio setup saw the problem before anyone else in the building recognized there was one. Zara was nearly a foot shorter than Hargrove. The gooseneck microphone at the lectern was calibrated for a man standing 6'2". The technician moved before being asked, crossing the stage from the wings in 12 fast steps, adjusting the microphone's height with the practiced precision of someone who has done this 1,000 times, checking the wireless feed. Running a 2-second test confirming the levels were correct, then disappearing back into the wings in the same 12 steps. Without once breaking the silence the room had assembled around itself. The whole thing took under 20 seconds. Most of the audience didn't consciously register it. What they registered was that when Zara reached the lectern, the microphone was exactly where it needed to be. She set the backpack on the floor beside the laptop stand. She took out the Chromebook. Her hands were not shaking anymore. Something had resolved in the transition between sitting and standing, between watching the wall being built from a distance, between sitting in row 6 being handed coffee cups, between all of it, and this which was not any of those things. Her hands were steady. She plugged in the HDMI cable. The connection registered immediately. The main screen behind her, the one that had shown Hargrove's final slide 30 seconds ago, the white text on black, the question is whether we should stop trying, refreshed. A GitHub repository page appeared. White background. Black text. For Daddy 2010. Public repository. Last commit January 14th, 2026. 600 people leaned forward at approximately the same time, the collective physics of a room recalibrating its attention. In the press row, 3 reporters typed the repository name into separate laptops within the same 6 seconds. Anyone could pull the code right now. Anyone could check the commit history, the benchmark notebooks, the timestamp on every file. The transparency of the thing, the fact that it was simply there in public, had been there for 6 weeks, available to anyone who had known to look, was itself a kind of argument. I'm not going to run a model live. She turned the small headset mic toward her mouth. The room waited. Hargrove, standing 5 feet to her right, tilted his head the way a hunter tilts his head at an unexpected sound. I uploaded all the code to GitHub 6 weeks ago. The commit history is time-stamped. The benchmarks were run on Google Colab, and the notebooks are linked from the repository. Anyone in this room can verify everything I'm about to show you tonight on your own machine without trusting me at all. She clicked to the next slide. A clean architectural diagram filled the screen. 3 boxes connected by arrows arranged in a loop. The first box, symbolic parser. The second, neural reasoner. The third, output verifier. The arrows between them moved in a cycle, not a linear pipeline, not input feeding into output, but a system in which each component informed the others, the symbolic layer generating an intermediate representation that the neural layer operated on. The output verified against the symbolic constraints before being confirmed. This architecture is not new. She kept her voice the same, measured, not tentative, not aggressive. The first version was published in 2010. At the panel table, Miriam Okafor sat up straighter. It was a small movement. The people watching her closely, the reporter who had stopped typing, a graduate student in row 12 who had been live streaming from his phone, caught it. She clicked to the next slide. A spreadsheet of results, 12 rows, 12 green check marks, timestamps running down the left column. These are 12 compositional reasoning problems from Big Bench N-step problems. The exact benchmark Dr. Hargrove showed 20 minutes ago as evidence of the cliff. My implementation passes all 12 at an average accuracy of 83%. A small sound came from the third row. Not a word, not even quite a breath. More the sound a room makes when something lands in it that it didn't expect to receive. The final prepared slide. A comparison grid. 6 benchmarks from Hargrove's presentation measured against 4 characteristics. 3 rows carried red X marks, the same marks appearing in the same column For all 6 benchmarks, consistent and damning in the way that consistent patterns are always damning. The bottom row had green checks in every column. The label on that row, intermediate symbolic representation. Every benchmark Dr. Hargrove cited uses raw natural language input. None of them test what happens when the language is first translated into an intermediate symbolic representation before the reasoning chain begins. She paused not for effect, but because the next sentence was the one that mattered most. The Aldridge limit appears in all of them because the limit isn't a property of intelligence. It's a property of feeding raw text into a single black box. Once you allow an intermediate representation, the cliff flattens out. The silence had a different quality now than the silence that had followed her first comment from row 6. That silence had been the silence of interruption of a room deciding whether to take something seriously. This silence was the silence of a room that has already decided. Miriam Okafor leaned into her microphone. Her voice was careful academic, the voice of someone choosing each word for its precision. Reginald, the architecture she's showing is structurally valid. I've seen variants of this idea in older literature. The challenge has always been scaling it. But if her timestamps hold, she has scaled it. From the far end of the panel table, Dr. Theodore Crane, 62 gray beard, the particular skepticism of a man who has watched many interesting things fail, leaned forward. This idea has been tried before. It always fails. You're right, sir. Zara's agreement was immediate. It has been tried before. The first published version appeared in 2010. The paper was rejected from every major venue, but the author proved it works if you configure the symbolic layer correctly. Hargrove's voice came from her right, still smooth, still controlled the voice of a man who has taught large classes for 30 years. He was not raising it. Raising it would concede too much. This is cherry-picked. She knew the benchmark in advance. She ran her model on problems she had already trained against. That's preparation, not science. Miriam turned in her chair. Reginald, the 12 problems she just showed are from Big Bench. They are the exact problems you displayed in your final slides. She could not have trained against them without contaminating her own data, which her open-source code would expose in seconds. Anyone who knows this benchmark would catch that contamination immediately. Then let her run new ones. Something shifted in Hargrove's voice, the smoothness held, but under it was something tighter, something that had not been there 20 minutes ago. Right here, I'll write them myself. Live. Miriam looked at Zara. The look was not encouraging, not cautionary. It was a question flat and honest, the kind one professional asks another before committing to something that can't be undone. Zara looked back. The green notebook was in her left hand. She had been holding it without consciously deciding to hold it. She could feel the soft, worn texture of the cover, the weight of it, not heavy, but present the way certain things are present. She nodded. Okay. Hargrove moved to the whiteboard with the directness of a man who has been waiting for this exact opportunity and knows what he intends to do with it. He uncapped the marker. He wrote with the purposeful speed of someone who has been composing these problems in his head since the moment the bait was taken. 4 compositional reasoning problems, each 9 steps deep, each in the Big Bench format, but with completely original content. Political scenarios, geographic sequences, abstract logical chains with no overlap with any existing benchmark dataset. He took 11 minutes to write them. He was thorough. He was careful. He was in the construction of these 4 problems unimpeachably rigorous. Miriam Okafor stood at his shoulder for the entire 11 minutes, confirming at each step that the problems were genuinely novel, genuinely 9-step, genuinely outside the scope of any existing training data Zara could have accessed. She confirmed this in a voice the room could hear. Hargrove stepped back from the board. He replaced the cap on the marker. He set it on the tray. Run those. Zara did not immediately reach for the keyboard. She opened a browser tab she had left ready. A Google Colab notebook pre-configured the cells empty above a single cell labeled Input, the rest of the runtime already allocated. She typed Hargrove's 4 problems into the input cell, word for word, exactly as he had written them on the board. The camera zoomed. The room watched her type. Every keystroke was visible on the main screen behind her. Every word of the 4 problems appeared in real time, transcribed exactly from Hargrove's handwriting on the whiteboard into the cell on the screen. When she had typed the last word of the last problem, she moved her cursor to Run All. She clicked. The status indicator turned amber. What followed was 2 minutes and 14 seconds, which is a very long time when 600 people are watching one person breathe. Zara did not watch the screen. She did not look at Hargrove. She did not look at the press row or at the panel table or at the cameras. She placed her right hand on the edge of the lectern and held the green notebook with her left. The amber status indicator continued to turn. The Google Colab runtime was processing the four problems through the symbolic parser, generating intermediate representations, passing them to the neural reasoner running the verification loop, assembling the output chains. Outside on the Stanford campus, the eucalyptus trees were doing what trees do in February, standing in the cold. In their particular way, the bark peeling back to reveal the lighter wood beneath, indifferent to what was happening inside the auditorium. The air smelled like nothing that had ever been fried in it. 3 weeks ago, Zara had been watching Epic 21 on a Chromebook screen in Bankhead, her father's notebook open beside her. The city outside her window doing the things Atlanta does at midnight. In the production booth, the live stream director watched the viewer counter climb past 94,000. He didn't say anything. He pointed at the counter. The person beside him looked at it. They both looked at the amber status indicator on the main screen. In the auditorium, someone in the back dropped a pen. The soft impact of it against the carpet was the loudest noise in the building. The status indicator turned green. 4 answers appeared in 4 separate cells, each one followed by a numbered chain of reasoning. Step 1 through Step 9. Each step identified each inference, labeled the logic transparent from input to conclusion in a way that could be checked, could be challenged, could be confirmed against the problems on the whiteboard behind Hargrove's shoulder. Miriam Okafor rose from the panel table. She walked to the laptop stand. She took 2 minutes to read every output, moving from the screen to the whiteboard and back, tracing each chain of reasoning against the problem that had generated it. She did not rush. She did not look at anyone while she read. When she finished the 4th problem, she stood very still for a moment, the stillness of someone completing a calculation they already suspected the answer to. She turned. She looked at Hargrove, not at Zara, not at the room, not at the cameras, at Hargrove. Reginald. A pause that contained a great deal. These are correct, all 4. The camera at the front of the auditorium was shooting Hargrove in 3/4 profile, close enough to catch what his face did in the next second. He took 2 steps toward the laptop. The step forward was not voluntary. It was the reflex of a man whose body has accepted something his mind had not yet caught up with. The close-up caught his expression in the moment before he recovered it. It was not anger. Anger would have been easier. It was not embarrassment, though, that was in there somewhere, layered under the thing above it. What the camera caught for 1 full second was the expression of a man recognizing something he had been refusing to recognize, a door he had been standing in front of for a long time, telling himself it was a wall, telling himself so consistently that the telling had become identical to believing. He had built 35 years of certainty on the other side of that door. He had built a book on it. The book was 11 days from launch. He tucked the expression away. He was practiced at this. He turned to face Zara. Who actually wrote this architecture? His voice was smooth again. The smoothness was costing him something. Now you could hear the expenditure of it, but it held. Was it a Stanford undergraduate? An advisor? Someone you met at a math camp? Zara paused. She turned her body slightly, not toward the audience, not away from Hargrove, but at an angle that meant the cameras could see her hands. She reached into the backpack with her right hand. She took out the green hardcover notebook, the one with the soft, worn cover, the one she had carried every day for 3 years, the one with equations written in 2 languages, English on one side of the page, Twi on the other, with a diagram on page 7 and a single word in small, careful script in the right margin. She placed it on the lectern. She opened it to the first page. She held it up for the camera. The handwriting on the first page was neat, deliberate, formed by a man who had learned penmanship in a school where penmanship was graded, who had taken the lesson seriously, who had carried the habit through graduate school, through 11 years of driving, through 4 published preprints, through rejection after rejection. The ink was dark blue. The date at the top was September 2009. The person who designed this architecture was named Kofi Mensah. Her voice was level. Not flat. There was something in it that had not been there before she stood up from row 6, a quality that came from having carried something a long distance and finally being allowed to set it down. He published it in 2010. The paper was rejected by every major journal in machine learning. She held the camera's gaze, not performing, not waiting for a reaction, just allowing the next sentence to be what it was. He was my father. The auditorium had the specific acoustic stillness of a large room in which many people have simultaneously stopped all the small physical movements that constitute presence. The shifting, the note-taking, the small adjustments of posture that bodies make constantly without instruction. For several seconds, Memorial Auditorium produced no sound. In the press row, every reporter was composing the same subject line in their head mensa. The father, the rejected paper, the daughter. In the third row, the research director from the major lab was already opening a browser tab. In the back row, an older man in a tweed vest, who had not spoken to anyone in 2 hours, was sitting very still, holding in his hands the specific weight of a name he had carried for 17 years, without knowing it would come back to him like this, in this room, from this person. Zara lowered the notebook. She placed it on the lectern in front of her. She did not look at the room. She looked at Hargrove. Hargrove looked back. For the second time in 3 minutes, something moved across his face that he did not fully control. He controlled it faster this time. He had been practicing that control for longer than Zara had been alive. The live stream counter in the corner of the production booth monitor crossed 100,000. The room held its silence the way a room holds silence after something irreversible has been said. Not the silence of nothing happening, but the silence of everything happening at once below the threshold of sound. 600 people were simultaneously running calculations that had nothing to do with mathematics. They were measuring the distance between what they had walked into this morning and what they were sitting inside now. The distance was not small. Hargrove was the first to move. He took one step toward the laptop stand, then stopped. The step was not strategic. It was what the body does when the mind has not yet caught up with what the ears have received. He looked at the notebook on the lectern, the soft, worn cover, the dark blue handwriting visible from where he stood. And something happened in the line of his jaw that had no name in the vocabulary of academic conference behavior. At the panel table, Dr. Theodore Crane had not been still for the past 90 seconds. He was bent over his iPad, the posture of a man following a thread he is not yet ready to announce. Crane had served as an action editor at the Journal of Machine Learning Research from 2010 through 2017. He still had institutional access to the journal's internal review archive. A database most people in the room did not know existed, a record of every submission, every reviewer assignment, every decision letter going back to the journal's founding. He had not accessed it in 3 years. He accessed it now. He typed 2 words into the search interface, Mensa K. The system returned one result, submitted October 2011. Manuscript ID 2011-1849. Title: A Hybrid Neurosymbolic Architecture for Compositional Reasoning. Status: rejected. The reviewer fields listed 3 names. Reviewer 1 was a researcher from MIT, now retired. Reviewer 3 was a graduate student at NYU at the time of submission. Reviewer 2 was listed as Reginald Hargrove, Stanford University. Crane sat with this for a moment. He did not look up from the iPad. He opened the full review file. He read it. His expression did not change in the way that expressions change when someone is surprised. It changed in the way that expressions change when someone has suspected something for a long time and has just been confirmed. He scrolled to the second page of the review. He read that too. Then he picked up the iPad and turned it face forward. He slid it across the panel table to Miriam Okafor. Miriam took it. She read. The reading took less than 45 seconds. She was not reading slowly. She was reading the way people read things they need to understand with complete precision before they speak. When she finished, she set the iPad down on the table in front of her. She picked up her microphone. She did not look at Hargrove. She turned her body toward the press row, the deliberate orientation of someone who wants specific people to be watching specific things, who understands that where you look when you speak determines who records what you say. Reviewer 2, November 2011, manuscript 2011-1849, signed by Reginald Hargrove. She read directly from the review file, her voice even the cadence of someone entering something into a permanent record. Speculative neurosymbolic hybridization with no empirical validation. The author's credentials cannot be independently verified. Recommends strong rejection. 4 seconds of silence. Not the reflective silence of a room absorbing complexity. The silence of 600 people processing a specific piece of arithmetic, the man who had just spent 22 minutes telling this room that the wall could not be crossed had been one of 3 people who decided in November 2011 that the paper describing how to cross it did not merit review. In the press row, 3 reporters were typing before the 4 seconds had elapsed. The Wired correspondent had already composed a subject line. The reporter from The Atlantic had her editor on text. The stringer from a major technology publication had stopped taking notes entirely and was simply watching because some things are better witnessed than transcribed in real time. Crane had not finished. He swiped to a second document on the iPad, a correspondence file from 2014 internal Stanford faculty records from an advisor-student exchange. He turned the screen toward Miriam a second time. His voice when he spoke had the specific quiet of a man who has been in this field for a long time and has not always done everything right, and is in this moment doing something right. There is more. He looked out at the room. A doctoral student at Stanford in 2014 included Kofi Mensah in the literature review of her dissertation. Her advisor recommended she remove the citation. He paused. The advisor was Reginald Hargrove. The student received her doctorate in 2017. From row 22, a woman's voice carried across the auditorium without amplification. Clear, steady, the voice of someone who has been sitting with something for 11 years and has just been given the room to put it down. That was me. Every head turned. She was in her mid-30s, a dark blazer, the kind of professional clothing that communicates competence without announcement. A Stanford alumni pin on her lapel. She had not raised her hand. She stood up the way people stand when standing is not a decision, but a necessity. My name is Dr. Priya Nair. I work at IBM Research. In 2014, I cited Kofi Mensah in Chapter 3 of my dissertation. My advisor told me very gently that references should come from peer-reviewed venues. She did not look at Hargrove when she said the next words. She looked at Zara. I removed the citation. I am sorry I removed it. She sat down. The silence that followed lasted 6 full seconds. Zara counted them without meaning to the way you count things, when the counting is the only way to hold steady inside a moment that is larger than you expected it to be. 6 seconds is not a long time in most contexts. In a room with 600 people who have all just heard the same 3 things in sequence, the review, the suppression, the apology, 6 seconds is an age. At the back of the auditorium in the last row nearest the wall, Dr. Calvin Webb stood up. He was 70 years old, a professor of computer science at Tuskegee University, and he had not spoken to anyone since taking his seat 2 hours ago. He was wearing a tweed vest over a collared shirt, the clothes of a man who dresses with care for things he considers worth dressing carefully for. He did not speak now either. He simply stood the way certain acts are completed in silence because the silence is the point. In September 2009, at a regional symposium in Atlanta, with an attendance of 23 people, an engineer named Kofi Mensah had given a 15-minute presentation on a hybrid neurosymbolic architecture. 20 of the 23 people had lost the thread by the 8-minute mark. 2 had been on their phones. Calvin Webb had been in the front row. Webb had listened to every word. After the talk, he had crossed the room and taken Kofi's hand. "Brother, your work is solid. Keep going." Kofi had smiled the wide smile that showed the gap between his front teeth and had given Webb a hand-printed copy of the paper which Webb had carried back to Tuskegee and placed in the second drawer of his office filing cabinet, where it had remained for 17 years. He had thought about it every year. He had never known until this morning that it had a daughter. He stood. He did not speak. He did not need to. Miriam Alkafor saw him from the panel table. She held his gaze for a moment, the acknowledgement of 2 people who have been in this field long enough to know exactly what his standing meant, what it cost, what it confirmed. She gave him one small nod. Then she pushed her chair back from the panel table and walked to the laptop stand. She did not touch Zara. She simply stood beside her the way you stand beside something you want the room to understand you are standing beside. Dr. Priya Nair in row 22 was still on her feet. A young man in row 14 stood up. A gray-haired woman in row 8. A man in the second row who had been taking notes since the beginning. 4 more people in the rows behind them. They were not applauding. No one was applauding. They were not performing solidarity. They were standing the way a jury stands when it has reached a verdict, and the standing is the verdict. The standing is the accounting. The acknowledgement that they had been present in this room for something and were not going to pretend they hadn't been. Hargrove stood alone at the edge of the stage. He was looking at the surface of the lectern. His hands rested on the wood, the left hand flat, the right hand with the tips of the fingers very slightly trembling. Not visibly from the audience, but the camera at the front of the room was close enough to catch it. He had been in this field for 35 years. He had published 41 papers, chaired 9 conferences, graduated 22 doctoral students, held an endowed chair for 11 years. He had written a book that was 11 days from launch, a book that contained in its central argument a conclusion that he had known on the second reading in November 2011, holding a paper by a man named Kofi Mensah, was not the whole truth. He had told himself it was. He had told himself with enough consistency that the telling had become belief. The belief had become certainty. The certainty had become 35 years of standing in front of a door and calling it a wall. Miriam Okafor reached across the panel table and picked up a single sheet of paper that Crane had prepared during the last 4 minutes. She walked it to the edge of the stage and placed it in front of Hargrove. It was a formal request, the language institutional, the structure procedural, to withdraw the keynote address from the official conference proceedings. Hargrove looked at the paper for a long time. The room watched him look at it. No one spoke. The live stream counter in the production booth monitor read 114,000. On X, the 14-second clip had passed 90,000 reposts and was accelerating. He picked up the pen from the lectern tray. He signed. His signature was small. The letters compressed the handwriting of someone whose hand was not fully cooperating with the instruction it had been given. He set the pen down. A reporter from Wired extended a microphone from the press row. "Professor, anything to say?" Hargrove opened his mouth. He closed it. He was not performing deliberation. He was genuinely searching for what was left after you had removed everything that was no longer true. When he found it, it was very small. "The architecture works." His voice was even careful, depleted of the particular richness that it had carried at the lectern 20 minutes ago. "I was wrong for years. That's all I can say right now." He turned. He walked off the stage from the same side he had entered, stage left, without looking back at the room or at the panel table, or at the girl standing at the lectern in the blazer that was 2 sizes too wide in the shoulders, who had carried her father's notebook from Atlanta to the stage and opened it in front of a camera and said the sentence that had been waiting 14 years to be said. Zara watched him go. She sat down in the empty chair beside Miriam Okafor, the headset mic still clipped to her blazer lapel. She did not stand to deliver the last thing she said. She did not raise her voice. She spoke into the mic the way you speak when the room is already quiet enough to hear you think. Sometimes a wall isn't a wall. Sometimes it's a door. The only thing keeping it shut is who's standing in front of it. The press row stopped typing for 1 full second, then started again faster. The hallway outside Memorial Auditorium was wide in the way that Stanford hallways are wide, built for importance, built for the passage of consequential people between consequential rooms. Zara walked through it with Simone on her left. The cameras had stayed in the auditorium. The reporters wanted Miriam Okafor. Dr. Crane, the shape of the institutional aftermath. They would get all of that. Miriam was already at the press table. Crane beside her, the formal accounting beginning. What was happening in the hallway was not institutional. It didn't require cameras. Hargrove was standing at the far end of the corridor, near a tall window that looked out over the eucalyptus trees. His back was to the glass. His blazer was still buttoned. He had the quality of a man who has walked in a direction without registering where the direction led, who has arrived somewhere and found himself there without having chosen it. He saw Zara when she was 40 feet away. He did not move toward her. He did not step back. He waited with the stillness of a man who has run out of the kinds of movement that had served him before. Simone slowed without being asked. Zara covered the last 20 feet alone. She stopped 6 feet from him. The window behind him framed the trees, the pale February light coming through the eucalyptus branches in the fractured way. Light comes through things that are not quite opaque. He was 63 years old. He had been in this field since before she was born. He had reviewed her father's paper in November 2011 and written 6 sentences that closed a door that Kofi Mensah had spent years trying to open. Hargrove did not apologize immediately. He did not extend his hand. He did not offer the professional gestures that professionals offer when a professional situation has gone wrong. He spoke to her the way someone speaks when the performance has been stripped away and only the thing underneath it remains not comfortable, not polished, just true in the way that things are true at the bottom of a long excavation. "I read his paper 3 times in 2011. I knew on the second read." He held her gaze. Not defiantly, he had no defiance left, but directly because looking away would be another form of what he had already done enough of. I told myself I didn't. He paused. I am very sorry. He said it without softening it, without surrounding it with context or qualification, without the academic's instinct to situate an admission within a framework that makes the admission more understandable, more forgivable, more professionally survivable. He said it because the words were what was left. Then he walked past her toward the lobby, his footsteps deliberate, not hurried the walk of a man going somewhere he has not decided on yet, but is committed to reaching. Zara stood very still in the hallway. The window light crossed the floor in the same fractured eucalyptus pattern it had crossed it in 30 seconds ago, indifferent to what had just occurred beneath it. Behind her, Simone moved closer. Her hand found Zara's, not gripping, just present the warmth of it, specific and deliberate. You didn't just speak for yourself in there, Hermanita. Simone's voice was quiet, not triumphant, not congratulatory, just true. Zara didn't answer. She didn't need to. She stood in the hallway with the green notebook in her left hand and let the moment be what it was, not victory, not relief, exactly. Something more complicated than both the particular feeling of a thing having been completed that was never supposed to fall to you to complete. She had been 14 years old. She had a laptop 4 years older than her social studies textbook. She had a repository named after her father that had been sitting in public for 6 weeks, available to anyone who had known to look. She had walked down an aisle in a too-wide blazer while 600 people decided what they were watching, and she had stood at a lectern that had been adjusted for her, and she had shown the work, and the work had held. The work had always held. That was the thing. The work had been holding since 2010. By Saturday evening, the Journal of Machine Learning Research had issued a press statement. The journal would reopen review of every paper Kofi Mensah had ever submitted to any of its associated venues. A posthumous fellowship would be established in his name, funded by a coalition of corporate sponsors who moved with impressive speed once the cameras were already running. Nature called the hotel twice. Both times Zara picked up, listened, then answered the same way. Talk to my mother first. She knew him longer than I did. Norton Press removed the pre-order page for The Wall from its website by Sunday morning. By Tuesday, the publisher confirmed the book was being permanently withdrawn. Hargrove, through his attorney, was reported to have requested the cancellation himself. No one in the professional community could recall him ever asking for anything to be canceled in 35 years. In the 2 weeks that followed, 3 other researchers came forward, each one arriving independently, none of them knowing the others existed. A doctoral student in Sao Paulo had cited Kofi in her 2016 dissertation and been told by her advisor's advisor that the reference was not appropriate for a serious academic document. A postdoctoral researcher in a Boston lab had emailed Kofi in 2019, having found his preprints through an obscure search, asking whether there was follow-up work. He had answered her at 3 in the morning, polite, grateful, specific about the technical questions she raised, but had died before they could arrange to speak properly. A software engineer in Mumbai sent a message through the GitHub repository's contact form. He had built Kofi's architecture into a production system. In 2021, had always wanted to credit the source, had never been sure where the credit properly went. He knew now. None of these people had met each other. All of them had been carrying the same silence in different rooms. The call to Atlanta happened at 1:47 in the morning, Eastern Time, 10:47 Pacific. Zara was sitting on the hotel bed in a Stanford-branded hoodie that Simone had bought from the campus bookstore without announcement, just placed on the desk outside Zara's door, with a note that said, "You earned this, Hermanita." The hoodie was soft. It was the most comfortable thing she had worn since leaving Atlanta. Nana picked up on the first ring. She was at the kitchen table. Not eating, there was nothing in front of her except the small frame photograph of Kofi that lived on the counter, but that she had moved to the table at some point during the day, and beside it a thin white candle in the brass holder she kept in the cabinet above the refrigerator, a candle she lit only on specific occasions. The candle was burning. The refrigerator hummed its too loud hum behind her. When the FaceTime connected, she looked at her daughter on the screen, the Stanford hoodie, the silk scarf wrapped around her hair because she had washed it that afternoon. The redness at the edges of her eyes from the kind of crying that happens after everything is over, and the adrenaline has left, and the body finally takes its share of the day. Nana looked at her for a long moment before speaking. "Mama, You saw Zara's voice was different than it had been in the auditorium, smaller, younger, stripped of the particular quality that public necessity had given it. This was the voice that lived in the apartment, the voice for refrigerator notes. 10 seconds of silence. The candle held steady. In the frame behind Nana, the photograph of Kofi was visible, the gap-toothed smile, the diploma against his chest, the summer light of a moment 30 years in the past. Nana did not answer in English. She answered in Twi, the language on the left side of the notebook pages, the language that Kofi had used for the margin note on page 7, the language that moved between her and her husband's memory, like weather between two places that understood each other. Akwaba, baby. Her voice was the steadiest thing in the room. Akwaba. Welcome home. Zara closed her eyes. The two of them cried in the quiet way that some people cry, not loudly, not with any particular drama, simply with the honesty of bodies releasing what they have been holding. The candle continued to burn. The refrigerator continued its hum. Neither of them spoke for nearly 2 minutes. There was nothing that needed to be said. The photograph on the table held the same expression it had always held, a man standing in front of a building in the country where he was born, smiling so wide you could see the gap between his teeth, before Atlanta, before the notebooks, before the rejection letters, before the 11 years of early mornings and highways and strangers with their verdicts. Before his daughter had stood at a Stanford lectern and completed the sentence he had begun in 2010. Before. 2 weeks after the conference, on a Tuesday, Ms. Carolyn Drake came looking for Zara at North Atlanta High School. Drake was the vice principal, now her title upgraded since 7th grade, though the office was the same one. Her hair had more gray in it. She found Zara in the cafeteria with 2 friends eating a turkey sandwich, a Tuesday that looked entirely like a Tuesday from the outside. She asked if she could sit down. The 2 friends looked at each other. Zara looked at Drake. Zara, I owe you an apology. Drake's voice was very controlled, the control of someone who had been practicing this in the car. I was wrong about you in 7th grade. I think I was wrong about a lot of girls in 7th grade. I've been thinking about it since the broadcast. Zara set the sandwich down. She thought about the green notebook in her backpack, which she still carried every day. She thought about the word Sankofa and about what it meant, not just retrieve what was left behind, but understand why it was left there. Understand the system that caused the leaving change. The system, if you could, or at least make sure the next person knows the door is there. She thought about the girl who would sit in Drake's office next year, or the year after, or the year after that, who would be told something about what kinds of things girls like her were suited for. Ms. Drake, I accept your apology. She held the woman's gaze not unkindly. Please don't say that thing to another student. The next girl might be the one. Drake's hand on the lunch table was not steady. She nodded once, stood, walked away through the cafeteria without looking back. Zara picked up the sandwich. Her friends, who had understood none of the exchange, asked if she was okay. She said she was. She was not performing okayness. She was in fact okay, which was different from being finished, different from having resolved everything, but sufficient for a Tuesday in March in a cafeteria that smelled like industrial cleaning solution and someone's forgotten gym bag. 1 month after the conference, an envelope arrived at the school's main office addressed to Zara Mensah. No return address. The handwriting on the envelope was angular, formed with the precision of someone taught penmanship by people who considered penmanship a moral commitment. Inside was 1 sheet of paper. 1 line. You were right. I was wrong. I am sorry to your father. No signature. None was necessary. The handwriting made its own identification, the same angular precision, the same compressed letters she had seen briefly at the bottom of a form that Miriam Okafor had slid across a panel table. Zara took the letter home that afternoon. She placed it in the cardboard box on top of the 4 RxG preprints next to the 3 hardcover notebooks beside the hard drive, still in its original sleeve. She folded the letter carefully first, the way you fold something that is going to be kept. She closed the box. She slid it back under her bed, where it had lived for 3 years, where it would continue to live until she decided it belonged somewhere else. By April, letters had arrived on heavy stationery from Stanford, Carnegie Mellon, Berkeley, Princeton. Each one described a fellowship program, a summer research opportunity, a named faculty mentor, a commitment to full tuition coverage beginning in the fall of the relevant year. The letters were the kind of letters that institutions write when they are trying to be part of a story they recognize belatedly as important. Zara read each one carefully. She did not respond to any of them before the end of the school year. When reporters asked her where she planned to attend college, and they asked often through the spring, the question arriving in interview requests that Nana helped her sort into yes and no piles at the kitchen table, she answered the same way every time. I'm going to Spelman first. The Atlanta Journal-Constitution sent a reporter in May, a woman named Keisha, who had covered education in Georgia for 8 years. She asked the Spelman question with the genuine curiosity of someone who was not performing the question, why Spelman? Zara was quiet for a moment. She was sitting at the kitchen table, the same table where Nana had told her the story of November 2011, where she had sat until sunrise after opening the cardboard box, where she had watched Epic 21 Complete on a Chromebook screen while the rest of Atlanta slept. The refrigerator hummed behind her. Because that's where I'm from, she said. Because that school has accepted girls like me since 1881, when most of these other schools wouldn't even open the door. The reporter wrote it down. Then she looked up from her notebook. Girls like you. Zara considered the question in the way she considered questions that were trying to make her say something smaller than what she meant. Girls who already know more than the room expects them to. On the last evening of the school year, the apartment was quiet, in the way it was quiet on the evenings when Nana wasn't working, a different quiet than the working night quiet, fuller somehow. The building's ambient sounds more present, without the background hum of anticipation that the working nights always carried. They sat at the kitchen table together, the two of them, the cardboard box open between them. The candle was lit. Zara opened the box slowly. She had not opened it since placing Hargrove's letter inside it in March. She took out the hardcover notebooks first, stacking them on the table in the order she had found them, 1, 2, 3. She opened notebook 2 to page 7. The diagram, the Greek letters, the arrows connecting the boxes in a loop. The word in the right margin, small and careful and exact, written by a man who knew what beauty in mathematics felt like from the inside. Fa. Nana reached across the table. She touched the margin of the page with 2 fingers, not tracing the word, just resting there, the way she had rested her palm against the laptop screen the night the email arrived. The gesture of someone touching a thing they can't quite believe is still in the world. They were quiet for a while. The candle burned in the brass holder. Outside the kitchen window, the oak tree in the parking lot held its shape against the last light. The tree that had been there before the building. The tree that would be there after, patient, immovable, its roots going deeper than any structure built around it. Zara reached for the first notebook she had ever kept, the green one. Not her father's, hers, the one she had started the night she sat on the kitchen floor with a glass of orange juice and took apart the contents of a cardboard box. She opened it to the first page. The handwriting was 11-year-old handwriting, unsteady at the left margin, more confident toward the right, the handwriting of a child who was practicing something. April 4th, 2022. For Daddy. She uncapped the black pen from the desk drawer. She wrote one more line beneath it, the handwriting different now, steadier. The letters more evenly spaced, the pressure on the page more deliberate, the handwriting of someone who had been practicing for 3 years and knew what they were writing toward. For every kid who was told they don't belong in the room. She capped the pen. She closed the notebook. She placed it on the table beside the candle, the 2 objects at equal distance from the photograph of Kofi in its wooden frame, the young man in the graduation gown, the gap-toothed smile, the diploma against his chest, the wide summer light of Accra in a year before Atlanta, before the notebooks, before any of it, catching him in the single expression of someone who has just been given permission by the world to become what he already knew he was. Nana looked at the photograph for a long time. She did not cry. She had done her crying in the staff break room at Grady with Karen Hicks's hand over hers, and in the 1:47 a.m. phone call when her daughter's face had appeared on a screen wearing a Stanford hoodie in a hotel room 2,000 miles away. There was a particular economy to grief that the night shift teaches. You spend it when you have to, you hold it when you can. You let it do its work in the hours when the work is survivable. She reached across the table and closed her hand over Zara's. They stayed at the table until the candle burned low enough that the wax began to pool in the brass holder, the flames shortening, the light becoming smaller. Outside the kitchen window, the Atlanta night was doing what Atlanta nights do in early June, warm, heavy with the smell of the city, the sounds of the buildings settling around them, the parking lot below the oak tree's branches just visible against the sky. Somewhere down on the street, a car started. The engine turned over, once caught, settled into the particular idle of something reliable and well-maintained. Headlights came on. The car pulled out of its space, stopped at the light at the corner, waited. A ride share. Someone heading to Hartsfield-Jackson before the morning rush, picking up a passenger who had a flight to catch a day, to begin a distance to cross between where they were and where they were going. The light changed. The car moved. Zara watched it go from the kitchen window, the taillights rounding the corner, the engine sound fading as it headed south toward the highway, toward the airport, toward all the people waiting to be carried from one place to another by someone who knew every route and said nothing about what he had been writing the night before. The candle in the brass holder gave one small flicker, then held.